Hey guys, what's up? Double Zug here. So this is going to be a quick PSA about the healer trinkets in Firelands. If you don't want to stay, I have like a spreadsheet with a bunch of math and stuff I'm going to go over and all that, but if you don't really care about that, you just want like the TLDR or whatever. The basic thrust of this is that Jaws of Defeat is bugged with mana reduction talents, the same way that Shard was. So it's going to be considerably lower value for Holy Priest, especially Disc Priest a little bit, Resto Druid, and Resto Shaman, although it will still give full value for like Holy Paladins, although Holy Paladins want Spirit. So Jaws should probably go to your Disc Priest, and then second, if you have a Resto Druid, it's probably decent on Resto Druid as well. So now that we've gone past that, let's actually talk a little bit about the math here. If you look at Shard, Shard says reduces base mana cost of your spells by 205. And if you look at Jaws, it has like a similar wording, right? It says like your next 10 spells cast within 20 seconds will reduce the cost of your Holy and Nature spells by 125. So this mana cost reduction thing is like coded the same way. And the way that this works is in Cataclysm, if you have any kind of talent or effect that's reducing the mana cost of your spell by a percentage. So like Mental Agility here, for example, says reduces the mana cost of your instant cast spells by 10%. What this will do is like, if you see here, Power Word Shield has a 6,300 mana cost. If I swap on Shard, it goes to 6116. So that's, you might think like, well, that's weird. That's not a round number, right? It's not like 205. And it's actually not. What's happening is that 205 is getting reduced by 10% before it gets taken off. So there's some weird coding here with how the mana cost calculations work that's like pretty disadvantageous for these flat reduction effects from trinkets. It's basically just Shard and Jaws that work this way. What that means is that any spec that has any kind of mana cost percentage reduction like this in their talents is going to get a reduced effect from Jaws. So I did some math here, and this is like based on Discipline Priest with Mental Agility. But the same thing is true for other specs that have this stuff. Like I tested it on Druid with Shard with the Moonglow talents. You can see Druid has Moonglow, which is a 9% mana cost reduction. This will also reduce the value of Jaws, for example. So as you stack up all the way up to 10, your first spell is going to get 125 reduction, then 250, 375, etc., all the way up to 1250. And so your total like mana saved on your first is going to be 125, right? And then it's going to keep scaling up and up and up. By the end, like if you only get 10 casts, you're saving about 7,000 mana, which is like 280 MP5 because the trinket's 2 minutes, so 6,800 mana over 2 minutes is 285 MP5. But for example, if you were to cast all of those spells as instants as a Discipline Priest with that Mental Agility, you'd only be getting like about 6,200, so you'd be getting a considerable decrease in your MP5. You'd be getting like a 10% decrease in this MP5 value, and especially if you're playing like a Holy Priest or whatever, if you have Mental Agility and Inner Will and you're spamming spells like Renew and Circle of Healing, which are all instant cast spells, you will be getting a 25% reduction in the value of this on use. That being said though, if you like have a very low GCD and you're spamming Renew, as long as you get up into the range of like, you know, if you're casting like 16, 17 spells inside this on use, it still is potentially competitive with something like a Darkmoon card for Holy Priests. For Resto Druid, it's going to be even better, right? Because Resto Druid only has 9% reduction rather than a 25%, given that Holy Priest is going to have Mental Agility plus Inner Will, which is like 10 and 15%. For Discipline Priest, I actually just did like a little bit of a nittier grittier math for this and compared it to Darkmoon card. So you'll notice like, what are the benefits of Jaws of Defeat over DMC? Well, you get a couple of things, right? You lose 400 spirit, and that 400 spirit is worth about like 270 MP5. These calculations were done unbuffed just with a flask on. You can see I have a flask on here, but no raid buff. So this is going to go up a little bit in raid, given that you'll have a little bit more intellect from raid buffs, and spirit scales with intellect. So if you swap on Jaws for DMC, you're going to get 112 intellect. So that spell power will take our spell power from, you can see here, like 10k to 10,142. So it's about like a 1% increase in spell power, which is significant, right? That's a decent amount more healing just on all of our spells, which is quite nice. It will also give us some base mana pool. So I calculated the base mana pool to be like 2,000 more mana And the value of that mana is going to vary over fight length. So like in a 2-minute fight, that 2000 mana is worth 84 MP5, which is huge. But on like a 5-minute, it's only 30 MP5. And on a fight like Ragnaros, where it's like 14 minutes, which is really what we're going to be gearing for, right? Because Ragnaros is the hardest fight in the tier. Initial mana pool becomes pretty negligible in its value, right? It's only like 10 MP5. So the other value that we get from that mana pool increase is what I calculated over here. I just looked at like a Domo log, and I looked at my Rapture, Archangel, Fiend, and Replenishment mana return. All of these are based on a percentage of your mana pool, so all your intellect is going to increase your mana pool and thereby increase the amount of mana you get back from these effects. So I calculated that the 2000 increase was about like a 1.5% increase in your mana pool. So I calculated like the total value of the mana from all these effects and then just, you know, increased it by 1.5%. So that intellect over like this 10-minute fight is going to give you about 10k mana. So it's like 85 MP5, so that's actually pretty significant. The reason I chose Domo here is just because this is a fight where I'm going to be getting Rapture on CD very consistently, and I'm going to be casting Archangel on CD very consistently. So this is sort of like a best case scenario for Rapture and Archangel, which are going to be our main mana returns that are percentage based here, right? So actually pretty huge here. I was surprised how much MP5 this was worth. And then of course the on use, my worst case is it's probably going to be worth like about 250 MP5 to 300 MP5. So your total MP5 on like a long, this is like a long fight, and assuming you get like 10 procs, right? You're playing normal. Some of those procs are going to be instant cast spells that are reduced by 10%. It's like about 360 MP5, which is better than a Dark Moon card. And it's not like too much better than a Dark Moon card, but because you're getting all these other sort of secondary stuff from that intellect, you're getting more spell power. The shorter the fights get, you're getting a little bit more MP5 from that initial mana pool. Jaws is like considerably better than Dark Moon card for Discipline Priest on almost every fight. And on a 2-minute fight where you're spamming Flash Heal, because Flash Heal gets the full benefit from Jaws without the 10% reduction, as well as being fast enough to get like about 14 casts in before your like buff falls off, you're going to be getting 600 MP5 from this trinket. So it's very, very, very good as fights get shorter, particularly on fights where you're going to have an opportunity to spam Flash Heal. So something like Balerock is like the perfect use case for this trinket. Jaws is like definitely pretty strong bis for Discipline Priest, and that's who I would prioritize this trinket to in your raid. I haven't done the math, like nitty gritty math for Resto Druid and for Holy Priest, but I think for both of those specs, this could potentially be a good choice over Dark Moon card. The thing about Holy Priest is that they get 30% extra scaling from Spirit, as well as that 25% reduction in the value of Jaws on use. So for Holy Priest, it's probably marginal, but for Resto Druid, I think, you know, you have less value from Spirit, and you're going to be spamming a lot of Rejuve and like, you know, low GCD spells. You're going to have decently high haste, and your mana reduction is only 9%. And you can also drop a point in this for another point in Genesis and get even more value out of Jaws, although I'm not sure if that's like necessarily correct mathematically. So yeah, how I would prior this trinket is first to Discipline Priest and then to a Resto Druid. And I would try to avoid picking this trinket up on your other healers because you're probably just going to bait yourself into using it. I think for Holy Paladin specifically, I don't think this trinket is very good. I think it's potentially good on shorter fights, probably good on Balerock specifically for getting a lot of stacks. And as fights get shorter, it could potentially be competitive, but I think that, again, just the value, the 30% extra scaling on your Spirit means that Jaws and Dark Moon card for Holy Paladin specifically on a little bit longer of a fight length, like more like what the fight lengths are going to be like in Prague. They're going to be basically a wash, if not Dark Moon card being better. So there's just better people to give this trinket to. And also, if you don't use the on-use correctly, this trinket gets much worse. If Dark Moon card and this trinket are about the same for a Holy Paladin, and the downside of putting Jaws on is that you can mess up and get like have it be much worse, it's just better to keep the Dark Moon card on. So unfortunately, Holy Paladins are in Dark Moon card Fall of Mortality jail until Dragon Soul. When it comes to Fall of Mortality gives like a decent amount higher MP5. The DMC was like 270 and Fall was like about 310 MP5. Again, that's unbuffed, so it's going to be a little bit higher in raid. And also you get like, you know, an extra 30 intellect or whatever it is. So Fall of Mortality, I think, is still going to be bis for Discipline Priests on those longer prog fights, but on those, if fight lengths get very short, You could potentially swap on something like I or the one that gives you mastery for like your dots and gain a little bit of HPS there, although the margins there are going to be pretty small. It's like probably going to be a wash either way. So that's trinkets and a little bit of gearing healing stuff for Firelands. Thanks for watching. Yep.
Swobu. Zug zug.